y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper.
Hey y'all, Kelly here. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast features scientist and herbalist Anna-Marija Helt, and I interviewed her via Zoom recently. She actually lives really close to where I am right now, but because of COVID and just our schedules, we decided to just do the interview online instead of even a 6-foot social distancing kind of interview. And I was really excited to talk to her. I've seen her teach at conferences on herbalism over the years and have heard a lot of her research and knowledge. So in this conversation with Maria, we talk about bridging tradition and science and herbalism and some history of how this divide happened. We speak about wild tending, OSHA, and substitutes for using other plants instead of harvesting OSHA. And we speak to OSHA's regional abundance here in the Southern Rockies, but its larger scale scarcity. We also talk about some of OSHA's deadly lookalikes, poison and water hemlock, and then we kind of get into pretty much a big discussion for the rest of the podcast on different kinds of poison plants that you can find locally in this area and also in other areas. But we were in particular focusing on the Southern Rockies, and Gabe and I did the Colorado Trail this summer, so it's fresh in my mind what I saw out on the trail that was poisonous, so I got to ask her some questions. So we speak a little bit about death camas, baneberry, corn lily, monkshood, and delphinium, Pulsatia, anemone, and a few more. We also talk a little bit about how plants grow quickly at high elevation as soon as the snow melts, which was something really cool to witness on the Colorado Trail. Just how short the growing season is, especially above 10,000 feet. So we kind of speak a little bit with each other about the beauty of being able to witness that when you go hiking here in the summertime in the Southern Rockies, where I am right now. I just also wanted to let y'all know before we get to listening to this episode that it broke up a bit here and there. I often have trouble at times when I'm doing online interviews finding service that won't break up. So I tried to edit out anything that was you couldn't really understand, what we were saying at all. And then there's some things I just left in because you can kind of make out what the word was and it makes sense for the whole context of that thought. So bear with this episode for some of that technical audio glitch in there, but it's pretty good overall. I just wanted to let you know that ahead of time. I'm gonna go ahead and get to this episode with Maria and enjoy this talk about poison plants and OSHA and plants of the Southern Rockies. Happy listening, y'all.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters.
Just give us a little bit of your background in, allopathic medicine and in herbalism and how those things kind of are connected for you and where that's brought you to today with your work.
Yeah. So I was a biologist, my undergrad degree was biology, and I wanted to either do environmental work or I was really into animal behavior, thinking about vet school. And I wound up just falling into research. And so I spent a few years after college working in cancer drug pharmacology as a technician, and then went to grad school and studied cancer. And a lot of people in my family had it. I've lost a friend a couple years ago to it. It's just such a crappy disease, and I wanted to do something useful, so I went to school and did cancer research and infectious disease research. So I studied a virus that causes cervical cancer, HPV, and so did that for a while. Liked many aspects of it, but my wiring wasn't so great for me to be in research science. I'm kind of wound, anxious, and I used to be a pretty thin-skinned kind of person. You have to be really tough to be in science, especially as a woman. And I was good at it, but, it was just so hard to separate the emotions out. And so I thought, well, let me, I like doing research. I like teaching. I like doing experiments. Let me do a postdoctoral fellowship and just see how it goes. And so I switched gears from cancer to dengue virus, which is a mosquito-borne virus that, kind of like the pandemic going around, has the potential to cause things like cytokine storm. And it's a really neat virus. So I did that at Berkeley for a few years, published my work. But to be honest, at that point, my nervous system was kind of a wreck. And I was just really tired and needed a break. So I left science. I bought a cafe in San Francisco. I was a cook all through high school and college. And so I always thought, well, maybe someday I'll have a cafe. So I did that and then wound up going to herb school. I was running the cafe. There is a woman, Laura Ash, who has an amazing herb shop in San Francisco called Scarlet Sage. And she would come in and tell me about what she was learning in her herbal studies many years ago. And I was like, God, that sounds really cool. Plants. I've always loved plants. I just, I even used to do, drug discovery work from blue-green algae, but I just didn't really think of herbalism. I just love being around plants. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And I tell a story, and I'll be quick. I was in Muir Woods. I just took the day off and needed to get out into the woods. And I was going to go birding. I was going to buy a bird book and see how many birds I could identify. And right next to the bird book was Greg Tilford's Medicinal and Edible Plants of the West. And I bought that too. And I wound up actually spending the day looking at plants. And it was a revelation. Like, that was the day I signed up for my first herbal medicine class. And that was 2008, I think. So that's a little while ago. So I come from the science background, and it's been a bit of a struggle in the beginning, at least, when I started studying herbs. And I studied at what was the Ohlone Center in Berkeley. It's now Berkeley Herbal Center, and it's an awesome place. It's one of the few clinical programs in the country. And I studied with Kathi Keville out at Oak Valley Herb Farm, now Green Medicine Herb School. And I also studied with Dawn Zaft, who does Chinese medicine. And there was a bit of a struggle because I had this science brain and like very left-brained and dense. And I had to let go of a lot of that. Not that, let me rephrase that. That doesn't sound good. I had to lighten up and open up more when I started studying herbs, because it's just such a bigger thing. Sure, there's a science aspect to it, but there to me is a spiritual aspect to it now. And there's so many other aspects to herbal medicine. And it just wound up being like, wow, do I belong here? Am I too much of a left brain nerd to do this? Do I fit in? There are other people doing really cool magical stuff with this. And now it's fine. Now it's, the tradition and the science are all integrated for me. And, but it was a struggle at first, because I was just like, I don't know. It was just a different way to approach things than what I was used to in the lab. So science definitely informs me as a practicing herbalist, as a clinician. I do like to read the research studies, but with a grain of salt, because a lot of them suck. They're poorly done. They don't use the herb right. But it's the tradition really that I rely heavily upon. How this herb has been used for centuries or millennia. I mean, that's even more valuable. And that is, quite frankly, farther along than research science is on a given plant. Like, we know what hawthorn does for the cardiovascular system. People have been using it forever for the heart. And the research was like, we can't figure out what the active component is. It's like, well, it's because they are. So I like to pull the science and the tradition together, but take a critical look at everything I do. That forms the direction I take as a practitioner.
I think I see in the herbalism community, I definitely see like a divide sometimes between people who feel very science oriented about it, and then people who feel very folk medicine about it. And I think holding both is important, but also sometimes science can just say that any other ways of seeing medicine, including indigenous ways of seeing medicine, is false. And I think that that's important to keep in mind. But science is also often proving what was already indigenous knowledge, too. It's like, we discovered this, but actually people have been doing this for a long time. So I think there's a play there between those two.
Yeah, I agree. Like there's this, and I was like this as a scientist, like it's like this, if it's not a placebo control, blah, blah, it's meaningless. And that's actually bullshit. Empirical data is important. My experience as a practitioner, I know what these herbs do. I don't need a study to tell me that yarrow is going to stop bleeding. And so I get pissed off at that aspect of science. Like, get over yourselves. Yes, it's important when it's well done and as unbiased as possible and all of that, you have to look at the funding. But yeah, and so I think that divide is what I struggled with, because that was the background I came from. I remember seeing something about echinacea back when I was a scientist, and I'm like, that stuff doesn't work. And that was pure ignorance on my part. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I was just like, there was one research abstract that I read where it didn't work. And it was, now as an herbalist, I look back and I'm like, well, it's because they didn't do it right and they're using it for the wrong indication. Mm-hmm. So there's that aspect of science that aggravates the hell out of me. And I can see where people on the other side of that are like, all of that's crap, but that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. On the other side of things, I see people kind of making stuff up. It's not tradition, it's not science, but it's this other technique. And I'm just like, where's that coming from? So I don't know. I trust a critical reading of the science, but it's not the end all be all. And I trust the tradition even more. Like you said, the tradition's far ahead. Often the science is lagging, like I said, and just trying to, it never proves anything. So the word prove is something that I don't usually use. Like, it's doing what we already know. Like, we know hawthorn reduces blood pressure. So we don't really need a study to tell us that, although it's nice for me to be able to work with a medical doctor who's now willing to send me people because they know I know the science, even though I'm using the tradition. So in a way, it's an ulterior way to get people on the natural medicine bandwagon. Whereas tradition, like, we already know what yarrow does. We already know how these plants benefit us. That said, I have, you can sometimes learn things from the research that we don't know from the tradition. I use elecampane as an antiviral herb, but I also use grandelia as an antiviral herb, just as an example. And people don't talk about that. You don't see that really in the traditional literature, but it works. And when you look at the research studies, both of them are chock full of antiviral chemicals. And so that is where I got I'm like, I wonder if instead of grabbing mint or whatever other, thyme, which is a mint, or blah, 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 when I feel like I have a viral thing coming on, or elder, let me try grabbing one of these, and they work. And so there are times where I actually do learn something new from reading the science. I'll read a chemistry study and it will give me an idea of how to use a plant that it's maybe not normally used that way. But that's this big, what traditions like.
In a way, the dichotomy between allopathic medicine and herbal medicine is kind of a new thing if you really think about it. Like, the doctors or people who helped people when they were sick, herbs even like 100 years ago were more commonly used, and it's just like a new thing that it's about these like compounds that you can extract is really often like and patent and make money off of.
It came from the fact that the quote root doctors were making more money than the allopaths, and the allopaths in the 19th century were the ones bleeding people and giving them mercury and giving them arsenic. They were killing more people. At least the root doctors weren't killing anybody, and they were helping a lot of people. And AMA formed in large part as a way to preserve the allopathic way and to make money. And so with the advent of pharmaceuticals starting in the early 20th century, and a lot of the moneyed families that were invested in the idea of making and selling drugs, we started getting outlawed, and this shoved underground. The herbalists kind of got kicked to the curb. A lot of the I know nothing about homeopathy. Let's be clear; it's not something I really trained in. But like the homeopaths got kicked to the curb. Anybody that wasn't an allopath and starting to use these strong drugs, we just kind of got. And it's unfortunate because you can see the price that we've paid in terms of the health of our population. Some drugs will save your life. I know that, but we ignore everything else. We're not eating real food. People are on the couch watching TV instead of out walking. I mean, for as much money as we spent on healthcare in this country, we're not in very good health. And it comes from that dichotomy. And even now, doctors, they're not rewarded for improving somebody's diet. They don't even really study nutrition much in school. They're not rewarded for that. They're rewarded for pushing farm drugs. And not all of them are like that. I know some amazing docs that really do work to kind of get people off of the pharmacy. But there's a dichotomy even in what it means to be a doctor. You really kind of have to go it on your own if you want to be more natural. And there's even a standard of care and the fear of getting sued if you don't prescribe a drug. It's just crazy,
Even a friend of mine who went to naturopathic school, which is supposed to be kind of a hybrid of allopathic and herbal medicine and other therapies, definitely they were pressured to still follow what is it called, primary care, what is it? You just said it.
Standard of care.
Standard of care of antibiotic use, and they just talked about how complicated it still would be as a naturopathic doctor to give something else instead of pharmaceutical antibiotics. In an instance where if you give something else, you can get sued. If you give something else, it's
exactly. Yeah. And I just, I think there's room for all of us in terms of herbalists. There's rooms for those of us who's kind of straddle the traditional and scientific biomedical model. I mean, I do Chinese medicine as well. There's room for people who are like, fuck science. And they're just amazing folk herbalists, just amazing, amazing, amazing. And there's room for people that are in the lab, studying these things. I think it all has value. And I think the conclusion I've come to is I get really annoyed when it gets factionalized, just kind of bringing it back to herbalism.
Well, let's talk about a couple plants. You live in Durango, Colorado, which is where I am right now. And there are a lot of amazing plants that grow around here. And this area is so unique. It's close to the Rockies in some way. It's also close to New Mexico border, which is its own south part of the Southwest and Mesa Verde and Canyonlands. It's there's a lot going on and coming together right in Durango. And you can get up into the San Juans, which is its own unique thing. And so
it's special.
It's really cool. The longer I'm here, the more I realize there's a lot of little ecologies that you can easily access. I lived in California for a while too. It's similar there in that sense of one side of the mountain is different than the other side of the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to the East Bay side of the Bay Area and then go up into Mendocino or just
There's a plant that you mentioned. We were talking about some plants that maybe we could talk about before we started the interview. And you mentioned OSHA is one that you speak about sometimes. And that plant, I was on the Colorado Trail this summer and at high elevations in some areas, it seems incredibly abundant. Sometimes one of the only plants, at least it's intermixed with willow or a couple other plants, but it seems so abundant, at least regionally, locally. And that's definitely, it's on the United Plant Savers at Risk list, though. It's very popular in commerce. It's a very good medicine, and I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on that plant and how I hear different opinions on what ways we should engage or use or not use that plant. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I don't harvest it. It's amazing medicine. Absolutely amazing plant. It's such a powerful plant, but I don't harvest it because it is such a regional plant. I know that it's very plentiful here. When you walk on some of our trails, there's just OSHA everywhere. but it's, it's here in part of the Rockies, it's in part of the Sierra, and that's it. So what I like to say is if somebody like Dr. Oz starts talking about Osha on his show, it kind of scares me what can happen with the population, at least the more easily accessible plants. And there are varying opinions on its vulnerability. Michael Moore, amazing late herbalist, at least at the time he was alive, wasn't that worried about it because it is so populous here. But at the same time, UPS does have it on their list to watch out for. So I chose not to harvest it because I feel like there's so many other plants you can use that aren't exactly Osha, but you can do some of the same things with it. And so some of us do substituting for Osha. Other people just harvest it. Other people try to maintain the wild populations. So like, as you said, there's a variety of takes on it. But I'll use other herbs depending on what I need to do, like thyme, for instance. You can grow it in your yard, so you don't have to go out and dig up a plant. And it is warming like Osha is. It's oily with volatile oils like Osha is. It's antiviral. If we want to get into these actions and such, it's antiviral. It's immune boosting, antibacterial. So it does a lot of similar things as Osha, not identical, but in many cases you can use it instead of Osha. Elecampane is a plant that's not native here, but you can grow it in your garden, and it has some similar energetic properties as well. And I do use it as an antiviral herb. And I hate that, like, this antibacterial, antiviral terminology, but it just makes it easier to talk about. A microbial balancing herb might be a more appropriate way to say that, but it's a great plant. And like Osha, it's a great lung tonic.
Osha has some lookalikes, actually right here where the land we're on, which is a riparian area that's like in the cottonwoods. There's actually springs that pop up on this land that are running right now, which is kind of nice since there's a drought right now. But there's a lot of water hemlock growing along it. And as the frosts have been happening more, they've been dying back more. But when we first got here, we were like, wow, there's so much water hemlock here. Okay, in the middle of the gardens, like where all the food is. We're like, okay.
I know. And it's actually a beautiful plant, but it's, the APACA, and like we kind of messaged back and forth about this. It's just one of those families that has some of the deadliest plants we know and some of the best fruit, like carrots and parsley and medicines like Osha and fennel. And you got to know what you're looking for unless you're going to give yourself a dirt nap. And water hemlock's a great example of how a medicinal species can grow next to one of the deadliest plants in North America. And you've got to pay attention, especially when we start talking about angelica and water hemlock and how similar their leaves can look. The whole, vein to the tip, everything's hip, vein to the cut, pain in your gut. So many things to pay attention to when dealing with that family, including Osha. And like for those of us that know the plants, it's obvious something that is, let's say Osha, and maybe one of the really nasty ones. But if you don't know and you don't realize that Osha might be a high elevation plant, and you see this beautiful Apiaceae growing next to your garage in Durango, you're like, oh, look at that, I've got Osha. It's like, oh no, actually it's poison hemlock. It all has lacy leaves and, that white umbel. And if somebody's not careful, it is pretty easy to make a mistake. So anyway.
I still question myself sometimes with that family. Like Gabe is pretty confident about the biscuit roots, and he'll just like dig one up and he'll eat it. And I'm like, okay, the carrot biscuit. But I still question myself, even though I realize that like Osha is usually at higher elevation, and then the hemlocks, right, they grow more at lower elevation. I'm just like, still, and on the trail, we rarely saw anything that we thought was poison hemlock or water hemlock. I mean, we were above 10,000 feet most of the time. There were a couple things that grew in the creeks that to me, we kind of figured out, like there was one called water, parsnip carrot or something that actually looked like kind of similar. I don't know, but it was an edible root, but it looked, it was like things like that. When we ID'd it, we were like, oh, okay, well, I'm still not going to eat it.
There's like, oh yeah, I have way too much anxiety sometimes and I don't know what the elevation cutoff is for water hemlock. I mean, if y'all are seeing it in Hesperus and you're at close to 8,000 feet, and OSHA can be found at 8,000 feet roughly. So there is, although they do look different, like the leaves are really different, but still, if somebody's not paying attention and they're not, doing the whole organoleptic thing and identifying a plant, you can get in trouble. And by organoleptic, I don't mean putting it in your mouth. That's not a great way to know if you're dealing with hemlock, but like smell it. OSHA has that smell, smell it, look at it, get to know it, and look at where it's growing. What is the microhabitat that it's growing in? Do you see something that looks like water hemlock that's like in hard pan dirt? Then it's probably something else, but that plant, it's a beautiful plant. I wish if I were at home, because I have a big pressed one. I'm going to be teaching a poison plants class at an upcoming herb conference in the spring. So I have a lot of these pressed, and it's beautiful. Like, you want to frame it, but it's like, there's an energy to it as well. Like, don't mess with me. It's that beauty, and that you better respect that plant, even though weirdly enough, it was used as medicine at one point. Just like,
people know exactly how to do it.
Oh my God, in extremely minute amounts. And nobody do this because you'll kill yourself. It's really deadly. But it was used for pain and anxiety and some other things that poison hemlock was also used for in extremely minute quantities. And I'm just like, nope, you can even get some of the toxicity handling it. So
I know we might, I don't know. We're doing some garden work here as part of our like trade to put our bell tent up, and I mean the water hemlock is kind of coming into the garden, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't want to weed this out all day, and I mean I could wear gloves, but like maybe you should just be here.
I'll dig it up if you. It's a beautiful plant, but yeah, you don't necessarily want it like right in your garden. Yeah. It's not like it's going to seep into your other plants, but yeah. I don't know.
Gabe's, I wouldn't recommend anyone do this, but one of Gabe's mentors, Benicia Medrano, who is a very self-destructive but very knowledgeable human being, she would experiment on herself with poison hemlock, and she just to see what it was like to, I mean, it's very small doses, to see what it was like to like experience being slightly like what it starts to do to you. And she said that her lungs and throat started to close, basically.
Actually, it's funny because I'm working on the class. Let me see if I wanted to quote, if we got onto this plant, I wanted to quote this because there's a doctor in England who did the same thing. He just wanted to see what it would be like. This guy, John Harley, is a British doc. So he deliberately, this is a long time ago, he deliberately ate some poison hemlock, and I don't remember what part he ate. And his description was, there was a distinct impairment of motor power. I felt, so to speak, that the go was taken out of me. The legs felt as if they would soon be too weak to support me. The mind remained perfectly clear, and the brain active throughout, but the body seemed heavy and well nigh asleep. And that's actually consistent with the historical accounts of Socrates being put to death, where they used poison hemlock to kill him because he was corrupting the youth and he wasn't buying into the state's religion. And the description is basically more or less, a numbness kind of proceeding up from his lower body, and he was talking while this was happening until finally he went through respiratory arrest. So I'll experiment with things, but there's no way in hell I'm adjusting any quantity of either poison hemlock or water hemlock. No. So what happened? Did she just wait and it resolved?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean,
I had a complete meltdown.
Yeah. But
I have panic attacks around breath. Like, there's no way in hell I'd be like, she told me a little bit, but she told Gabe a lot more about it. And I mean, she was out by herself alone a lot for very long periods of time. And, I think that sometimes that's what she felt like
it was okay to do. And
Yeah.
yeah, just wanted to know. I had another herbal teacher in Ohio. I won't say what his name is or anything, just because I don't know. But he said he would keep poison hemlock in his garden in case he got too old to take care of himself, that it was a way for him to choose his own.
Yep.
If he got to a point where he couldn't be able.
I could respect that.
Yeah.
I can respect that. I wouldn't want to use water hemlock for that. That would be painful as hell, but poison hemlock might be a little more pleasant.
Well, he had his opium
This
poppy.
is going to be awful. Maybe like a tincture of opium poppy right before, and then take your hemlock.
He had his opium poppy and his hemlock next to each other together. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, like I love poisonous plants. I think they're fascinating, and the ones we have locally are to be stunningly beautiful. And I think it could be a good plan B for that, depending on which one you pick.
Well, on the conversation of poisonous plants, which we talked about how that would be fun to talk about a few of them. When we were on the trail, we also saw a lot of all of the plants that you listed to me before we got on the call. I'm like, oh yeah, we saw lots of that. I mean, Gabe is particularly interested in the death camas. I mean, he has on his parents' property, they have one variety, and then up in the mountains we were seeing a different variety, especially because he's into the tendon camas, which doesn't grow here and doesn't look anything like death camas. But that's one we definitely saw a lot, and it's very beautiful. And I don't know what that would be like, but like how poisonous it is.
It's extremely poisonous. I mean, it's up to its name. So we have mountain death camas here. And my Latin pronunciation is horrible, but Zygodinus elegans is the species that is native to, Colorado in our mountains here. And it has toxic steroidal alkaloids in it. And so that's the kind of the bad part. And it can cause respiratory, you can die from lack of breathing or heart failure. Some of the milder symptoms as it starts kicking in includes like thirst. You kind of lose muscle control. Animals die from this. Sheep seem to like it for some reason. So, having sheep out on the range, if this plant's around, you might wind up losing some to this plant. It's bee pollinated, which is interesting because it doesn't affect the bee, but other small insects that aren't pollinators will be killed by it. Which I think is kind of funny. I don't know. We're so used to thinking that animals, and those of us that are mobile, are the dominant species on the planet. And I like a plant that's nuanced, like, okay, bee, you're helping me out. I won't kill you, but you? Goodbye. And so ours is highly toxic, and it will grow in the same spot as blue camas grows. And that camas root's edible. It's it's starchy tuber rhizome, I guess, technically. It's, it's starchy and nutritious, but they'll grow right next to each other. And even though one is a white flower and one is a beautiful blue flower, they're all intermingled. So for some of these plants, I have no interest in ingesting them. Like, nah. But I appreciate them. I like sitting with them. I've pressed them before because they're just pretty to look at. I like nerding out about their chemistry. I do like looking into the history of medicinal uses. But I'm like, no, there's so many other good medicinal plants. I don't really feel the need to experiment with mountain death camas. I do use fly agaric as medicine, for instance. I'll use it. It's a great topical treatment for nerve pain. You have to prepare it right, but I even eat it as a food when you have to boil the shit out of it with salt water to get rid of the water soluble toxins. And I'm not telling anybody to do that because some people do not react well to the mushroom, but I'll experiment with certain things. So I'll experiment with that. I do use bingberry root as medicine, and a lot of that plant is toxic, but the root can be useful if you know what you're doing in low dose. But some of these, like the mountain death camas and the hemlocks, corn lily, I'll appreciate them and love them for their beauty. But
I was going to ask you about corn lily because that one has a very large leaf, and I had someone this spring try to tell me that was skunk cabbage. I don't even know if skunk cabbage grows here.
But yeah, and they both, like, I grew up where skunk cabbage grew, and it's got that stout, thick rosette of leaves. And so people see corn lily as it's just starting to grow with those stout leaves. And, you know, if we got in the corn lily, it was going to be one of the first things I said was, it's not skunk cabbage. Somebody might correct me on this, but I'm not aware of us having skunk cabbage here. I think we're too dry. And all parts are toxic of corn lily. It's another one that has these steroidal, these big structured, quite beautiful if you're into chemicals, alkaloids. And it'll do some weird heart things. It'll really slow heart rate down, for instance. And in animals that do eat it sometimes, they'll froth at the mouth and almost like they have rabies. They'll get lockjaw. And like dizziness, you know, just all of these signs of serious nervous system effects, but it was used for medicine. This was actually used in the 50s and 60s as a blood pressure medicine. But there was so much toxicity associated with the use of it that it was discontinued. But it is one of those kind of, you know, scary plants in terms of its toxicity that was used as a drug at some point.
I was on a hiking trip one time and someone really thought it was the best toilet paper. And I was like, I don't know if that plant uses toilet paper because it has a nice big leaf, right? But enough of that.
It's a nice big leaf. It doesn't have those annoying leaf hairs that mullein has. And mullein is not toilet paper of the woods, people. Not unless you want those little hairs in your butt. I don't know that I would do it just because, I don't know how much you would absorb. But no, find thimbleberry or something instead.
Maybe
they are beautiful though. You know, I mean, such a cool looking plant.
You get into these high elevation meadows and you'll see them and then when the cold weather starts to set in up there, they start to turn orange or yellow and orange, and it's just so beautiful. Like seeing them, in these. They're just such a characteristic plant, and they have that smell to, like, you can smell them when you get up to the high country. And they're, you know, it's like all of our high country plants here, they have such a short growing season. And like corn lily just gets so big so fast. I went up to the passes, like up, you know, Coal Bank one time. I was just like, let me go up to the high country to see what's going on. It was the year, a few years ago, where we had a real winter at Pass Creek. And there was mostly multiple feet of snow still in that parking area and just a little area where it had melted, and there are already corn lilies. Like, here I am, about that big, you know, they must have already been growing under the blanket of snow, and it blew me away seeing them with 3 feet of snow right there. But just how robust they are. And they're like, we're not wasting any time. It's time to grow and reproduce. And anyway, it's a really neat plant. Yeah, on the trail, it was really cool to see, like, because we started off at lower elevation. We started at the Denver end of the Colorado Trail, and like then as you walk up, you're kind of, it definitely felt like summer, and then when you were walking up into the high country, it felt like spring. But spring and summer in the high country are pretty much like spring, summer, fall. It's like spring, summer, fall. And
Yeah.
it was a lower snow year, but even just seeing right at the snow line, all the plants that like immediately were like, we're ready, you know, because fall is right around the corner. It was really cool.
It's so amazing, you know. And if you're like, I grew up on the East Coast, where it's just so luxurious there if you're a plant, you know. I mean, there's so much moisture. You're not at 8,000 feet getting blasted with UV light. And I love the plants back east, don't get me wrong, but I have a lot of respect for our high elevation plants that have to kind of grow, have sex, and get it all done before they die in like 2 months or 3 months.
Not to mention it's very dry here. I know in the high mountains it can be different. We ran into a lot of thunderstorms, and in the San Juans we got hit by rain every day, sideways, ice, rain, sleet.
I remember reading your post, being soaking wet.
Well, the most of the trail was pretty dry.
I was cold for
Yeah, it was like pretty easy until then, or it was actually really hot at times, and then suddenly the San Juans were just like, oh my God. But I don't know if it was really raining like up there, like I know our friend said that there was some flooding in Durango, but then it's rained one time probably since then. I don't know. It's just, yeah, a lot of the plants have to deal with like drought here, or like time without rain, you know.
Yeah.
I grew up in
it's pretty crispy.
South, where it's more jungly, too. So I'm used to seeing that lushness, you know.
Yeah. So when you see it here, it's really special. Like when you go to somewhere like Elbert Creek, that's really wet, or you take that path towards Snowden, where you go through the woods and it's wet and there's moss. You're like, oh, it's so green here, in that little spot. And then you come back out into the dry and you're like, Colorado.
We went into a couple spots like that at the beginning of the trail. It's access to the Front Range. There was these little creeks, drainages that even had some plants that I'm used to seeing more out east. And or I don't know, maybe they do grow more abundantly out here. I just haven't noticed. But there was just like, it was like, I was like, Gabe, this is what Appalachia's like. This tiny little, I'm like, this like all the plants hovering over in the trail, and you know, and he's like, wow, you know.
The trail, like there's the trail, and then like there's like a canopy over the trail, and then the canopy over you back east. And it's those I find refreshing because I love it here, but the harshness sometimes can be a bit much.
Totally. Yeah. We also saw a lot of the monkshood and delphinium on the trail. Beautiful purple flowering plants. I thought that they both were in the same genus, but I looked it up beforehand and I was like, oh, they're actually different genuses. But those, I mean, a lot of people grow, I don't know about monkshood.
They're different.
Yeah, a lot of people grow at least delphinium as a cut flower and don't realize it's poisonous. Yeah.
It's a common garden plant. It's gorgeous. I actually think our wild one's pretty, but you see it in gardens a lot, delphinium. And they are related, obviously. They're in the same family, and you look at their leaves and they look similar. They're in the buttercup family. And one's aconitum, the monkshood, and delphinium is the larkspur. And what's neat is, at least in the places that I go, the monkshood is not as common as the delphinium. So like out, if you're bushwhacking in La Plata Canyon, or out up on Engineer, or out up like past Andrews Lake, going into the Wiminooch, there's so much delphinium, and it's really beautiful. My gosh. And then every once in a while you're like, oh, that one's just a bit of a deeper indigo. I think that's a monkshood. And you go up to it and it is. And so it's neat. It's kind of special when you find the monkshood, because it's not as profuse here. And that one I think is even more beautiful than the delphinium monkshood. So ranunculus family, buttercup family. And it's thought that it came from the spit of Cerberus, and I'm probably saying his name wrong, but the multi-headed dog, as Hercules dragged him out of Hades. That's the legend behind where the plant came from. So I guess the spit hit the ground and up it came. Pliny, like Pliny of old, called it the most, what did he say? The most prompt of all poisons. So like fast acting, toxic, and the whole plant is poisonous. It has diterpene, alkaloids for people that are chemistry nerds. So you notice the theme here: alkaloids, alkaloids, alkaloids. And a lot of these toxic plants are the main toxic components. And this is another one that will mess with heart function and heart rhythm. You can have tachycardia from it, really rapid heart rate. And you can even have asystole, or just cardiac arrest. The heart can stop with a high enough dose. So it's a serious plant, although aconite is used in Chinese medicine when it's processed in a certain way that they've developed over thousands of years to do safely. And, but I wouldn't mess with it. It's another one that will cause a lot of digestive pain as well, and a lot of just neuromuscular issues in the body. Even handling it some people have had numbness and tingling in their hands when they've handled it. So, you don't want to be like rubbing it all over yourself, but it is a really beautiful plant. And again, it has been used medicinally, but it's not really to be messed with. And in terms of people that have maybe, I don't know, thinking it's something else or for whatever reason ingested it, but I've seen the statistic that the in-hospital mortality rate is like 5.5, that people that are getting treated for it in the hospital, about 5 out of every 100 people die. And that's a pretty high mortality rate, actually, when you're getting support. So it's another seriously toxic, but really beautiful plant. And to me, it comes down to respect. To me, when I see those beautiful meadows, the message that I get from those meadows beyond the beauty is this hardcore message of respect. You need to respect us. You need to respect nature. We can kill you. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And so Larkspur also toxic as well. All parts, just like monkshood. Some of the chemistry is similar, some of the chemistry is different. And a lot of people don't know the name Larkspur actually comes from the bird lark. So the bird foot has the spur on the back of it. And so when you look at Larkspur, you know this, but when you look at Larkspur flower close up, it has a spur behind it. So the flower kind of resembles the bird's foot, a lark's foot, which is where the name comes from. One thing I do want to point out for people that are out and about and who are maybe harvesting geranium, wild geranium, the leaves can look somewhat similar. Our wild geranium that we have that grows right next to Larkspur, grows right next to monk's hood. The leaf has shape, and I wonder, I was going to dig it. I have a file where they're next to each other, and I was going to share my screen, but I don't know I'll probably mess it up. So just be aware if somebody's out digging geranium root, they need to be aware of how to tell the difference between that plant and these. And they do look very different when you get to know the plant, but in the early season when Larkspur and monk's hood are smaller, it can be a little easier to make that mistake. Looking at that leaf, the very heavily dissected kind of 5-part leaf.
Are they the same family?
It's whenever I talk about these plants, whether I'm talking about the poisonous ones or I'm talking about wild geranium, I just like to point out to be careful.
Are they in the same family?
Geranium is
a different family, maybe?
Different family. I don't believe geranium is in the ranunculus. I should know this. I don't believe geranium's there. I know something like, how do you spell water? I don't know.
I was just curious. I have its own family. I feel like I'm getting that intuitive.
I'm looking it up now because like, what the hell? Is it in a geranium family? It is. It's got its own family.
Okay.
So Larkspur and monk, despite the similarity of the leaves, Larkspur and monkshood, as I said, are buttercup. It's like, yeah, geranium is geranium family. Yeah.
There's one more plant that we didn't talk about beforehand that I just thought of. Anemone and Pulsatia. I guess it's a low dose medicinal, and but it can burn. It's like hot, and I don't know if it's considered a poisonous plant ultimately, but it is very useful medicinal. I know some people that swear by it for panic attacks and stuff. And
I had a panic attack taking it.
Really?
I hate flying, and so I was like, well, I'm going to try anemone because it's supposed to be great for anxiety. And I've had panic attacks flying where I just kind of go fetal. And so I took just a couple of drops and I felt my heart rate slow down, which is, it's what it does. So it was working, but the fact that I could feel it sedating me freaked me out. So I had a panic attack because of the plant. But yeah, a lot of people will use it for anxiety and panic attacks. And after that, I just stopped using it because it wasn't that I was afraid of the plant, but I felt the physiological effect of it enough that I was like, oh. I was on anxiety meds at one point, and even they could trigger a panic attack. It's just like, oh God. But it's a good plant. It's one of those, like a random factoid. It's one of the tinctures that doesn't have as long of a shelf life as some other tinctures. You know, tinctures theoretically, if you keep them stored properly, can last years and years and years and years and years. You know, Michael Moore in one of his books talks about finding a really old yarrow root, very old yarrow root tincture, and it still had some kick to it, or maybe it was roots in alcohol, but they were still like, an enemy doesn't last quite as long as a tincture. So just throwing that out there. If anybody has one that's been on their shelf for 5 years, you know, or maybe it just attenuates it a little bit, so it's not quite as strong.
Yeah, I've used it sometimes too for like when I've had insomnia, and it's very fine. There's a fine line between like, you want to just keep taking it, it's not working, you know, or and then that becomes not a low dose anymore at that point. You know?
Like, woo! Yeah. And it's like we're practicing with clients. I'm careful with those sorts of plants. Like I do use baneberry root for people, but I always have it in a formula so that they're not going to overdose accidentally. Like you give somebody, and I've done this before too, like you have a low dose tincture, and I've done, was it an enemy? I don't remember which one it was. And I wasn't thinking, and I just took a big squirt and I'm like spitting it out when I realized what I did. So for things like an enemy, if I'm giving it to a client, just to be careful, I'll blend it with some other calming herbs so that even if they do take too many squirts beyond what I tell them, they're okay.
Yeah, I know Gabe's taken it and he says it helps him actually forget that he was stressed out about something, you know.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and that helps because sometimes it's all about the way your mind can create thought loops around a thing, a fixated point, you know. And so if it can help you forget that you had a fixated point, that's a good thing, you know. But
I could use that. Yeah.
Well, I have heard, because I'm not from Appalachia, but I'm from like the Piedmont in the South, which doesn't have many of those amazing plants. But I studied in Appalachia and lived there for years. And baneberry or doll's eye, I guess there. I don't know if multiple species grow there. I can't remember. But the one that's called doll's eye, which is a different species than what's here, was growing. And there we have black cohosh, which it looks really similar to.
Yeah.
And then some other plants besides black cohosh and baneberry, they look similar too as well. And and a lot of people are like, it's poisonous. And then I heard someone else say you can use it like black cohosh. I was like, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I mean, I haven't played with that one.
Yeah.
And we saw it a lot on the trail and around here. It's pretty common to see it, at least closer to the creeks and stuff. And I'm curious how you use it in your practice.
It's another, just all of these plants, they're just gorgeous. And if you've ever grown black cohosh, you're like, oh yeah, they're related. I don't know much about the Eastern one. I know there is a tradition of it being used, but I don't really know anything about that. This one, our Western one, Actea rubra, the red baneberry, has been used similarly to cohosh, or Cinici fuga racemosa, or I guess it's now Actea racemosa. Nomenclature. So a lot of similar uses, musculoskeletal stuff, you know, rheumatoid conditions, you know, cycle related issues, menopause related issues. It's the root that is used, or the rhizome, similar to black cohosh. It's a low dose plant as well. And Kiva Rose talked about it. Michael Morris talked about it. So I started experimenting with it, and I played with it off and on myself for about a year before I used it in anybody. Because, you know, I will experiment with things, but I do it in a conservative way. And it's been great. So I'll use it for menopausal clients where it's a very small portion of their formula, and it can be really helpful. But really, even black cohosh doesn't need to be a big part of a formula to be effective either. They're both acrid. There's an acridity when you taste them, and they're both sweet. In fact, when I first made a baneberry root extract, I thought, I'm like, did I somehow weirdly get, like, did I take Ambien and get naked and like throw licorice root into my baneberry root tincture? Because it tastes really sweet. What the hell? And then, you know, the acrid part of it too. But then I actually found one of Kiva's write-ups, and she described the sweetness to it. And so it's surprising. But the plant is toxic. Even though the root does have a history of medicinal use, And it is a low dose root, like you're not going to drink an ounce of this tincture, but the berries are pretty toxic. And I don't know if there have been any deaths in North America, but I know in Europe, children, like those red berries can be really attractive. And some children have died eating it, the berries, and it can cause rearrest. It can cause a rapid pulse, tachycardia, cardiac arrest. So it's a serious plant. It's a plant that deserves respect. And interestingly enough, I'd seen white berried versions here. And in the same area where I see the red version. And I'm like, what the hell? What's going on? I thought we only had Actaea rubra here, and it is Actaea rubra, but apparently there's a variant that produces white berries. So it looks like doll's eyes.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So it's a gorgeous plant. It is a toxic plant. The berries are really toxic. I know less about the other. I think the aerial parts are toxic, but I'm guessing, I'm not positive. And it's, you know, the root can be used, but just carefully. You know, it's another one that I would never give somebody a simple tincture of. They'd be like, here you go. You know, it's in a formula as a small part. And I don't know that it's necessarily identical to its cousin, black cohosh. The taste isn't identical, which means the chemistry isn't identical, but it does have a history of use for a lot of the same things.
I know black cohosh is often over-harvested out east where it grows, and yeah. I don't remember if it's on the at-risk or to-watch list by United Plant Savers, but you know, because it's in commerce for like menopause, hot flash medicine, they put black cohosh in everything. And
yeah, luckily you can grow it. So I do use that plant as well, and I get it organically produced. Mm-hmm. And I use it more than I use baneberry because I appreciate wild medicine. I think it is great to get wild plants and use them as medicine. There's an energy, but I often will turn to cultivated plants. Like if I'm not growing it myself, and I'm not anymore because I live in a condo now, then knowing who's growing it or getting it from a trusted organically grown source to take pressure off of the wild plant. So I'll use organically grown black cohosh. And I will use baneberry, but I don't use it as much just because even though it's pretty common here, it's not like you see these big forests of it. So I'll harvest a little bit and keep a little bottle on hand, but you don't need much of it. This might be TMI to share with the public, but I was experimenting with it for depression, for chronic depression. I was like, I want to see, like I've always wanted to use black cohosh for myself, for mood, because it can be good for kind of that black cloud, just funk. But black cohosh always messes my cycle up. It doesn't work for me. So I bleed too long, my boobs get sore, it's kind of annoying, I get bloaty. Baneberry did the same damn thing. I was like, oh, maybe baneberry will be good for mood. And I was literally doing 1 drop 3 times a day, and it still messed my cycle up. Like I was bleeding a lot longer than I normally would. My breasts got sore. 1 drop 3 times a day. That's potent medicine.
Was there a place where people can find you? I saw that your blog, you have tons of information and years of posts and articles and videos and things. So that would be a great place for people to go. But is there, where can people find you?
So I have a website. It's kind of like I have somebody who's updating it because I haven't upgraded it in like 10 years. So it might be a little wonky at the moment, but it's osada.com. O, S as in Sam, D as in dog, AHA.com, which means kind of big medicine in Sanskrit. And so, a lot of my articles and videos and such are on there. Or like for people that are wanting support with natural health, that information's on there, how that works. And a lot of my videos are on YouTube as well. So if you just look up my name on YouTube, Anna-Marija Helt, you'll find some videos there. I'm compared to maybe some herbalists, I'm a bit under the radar as an introvert. And so sometimes I just hide and I'm not out in a really big way. But if you like to read, I write for Plant Healer Quarterly. It used to be Plant Healer Magazine that Kiva Rose and Wolf Harden publish. So I have a mushroom column that comes out quarterly there. So that's a way to see what I'm up to as well. But yeah, I work with people locally. I work with people at a distance now. What with COVID, telehealth has started becoming a thing. I am teaching on Rocky Mountain medicinal mushrooms in February online for Dara Seville, who's an incredible herbalist in Albuquerque. And if you've not interviewed her, you should.
I did.
Oh, good. Yes, she's awesome.
She's on the podcast.
Yes, I need to look that one up. She's freaking awesome. So I'm teaching through her Albuquerque herbalism program in February, and that's listed on my website. And then I'm teaching through Berkeley Herbal Center, a 4-part series on fertility, also in February or March. It'll be on my website. So if anybody's interested in a little distance classes.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me on here, and really fun talking to you about these plants. Take care.
This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.